Just a quick programming note before we begin. There is associated bonus content with this episode. We went rather long talking about pencils, and Bert got off on a bit of a tangent talking about one of his passions, which is fountain pens. So make sure you're signed up on Patreon if you'd like to hear that conversation continue. Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlock Holmes scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. And by listeners like you who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Find out more at patreon.com/trifles. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the stockbroker clerked, Lady Frances Carfax disappeared, and Bruce Partington planned, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever wondered what a commissionaire does? Or what a compositor is? Or of the difference between a stevedore and a stoker?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 358. Pencils. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, jot down this note.
Wait a minute, where's my cuff? Hold on a minute. I don't have a cuff on my shirt collar. My shirt, I'll have to use my trouser cuff. Hold on while I bend over.
Well, I know it's hard to write a note when you're wearing short sleeves, so...
And shorts. You can't even...
Well, you need a tattoo pen is what you need.
No, what I need is a portable cuff. Why has no one invented this?
Oh, my gosh, I should have thought of that. Disposable portable cuffs.
Yes.
There you go. Well, we're not here to talk about clothing. We are here to talk about the most common writing implement in the Sherlock Holmes stories, the pencil. Where does it appear? How is it used? And a little bit of history on the pencil are coming your way. If you'd like the show notes for this episode, which may actually include some additional links for you to check out, you can see ihose.co/trifles358. It'll take you to the SherlockHolmesPodcast.com website, all lowercase ihose.co/trifles358. Those links will be there, as well as the ability to sign up for email updates. Make sure you're subscribed to the show. You can subscribe to us, of course, on whatever podcast listening device or platform you happen to be fond of. You can even say, listen to the latest episode of Sherlock Holmes Trifles to your smart speaker. Wherever you listen to us, just know that we do offer an ad-free version of the show for our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/trifles. And if you download the Patreon app and interact with us through there, we actually have a chat that we've opened where we are soliciting your ideas for episodes in Season 8 in 2024. We are constantly trying to come up with new ideas, new fresh approaches here at Trifles. And look, 7 seasons in, we're running out of steam, so we could use your help. What did we miss? What would you like to hear discussed? What burning question about the Sherlock Holmes stories have you always had? Check it out in the Patreon app or just email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. Again, that's trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. We'd love your input. All right, Bert, we promised to talk about pencils. Well, why don't you frame it up for us? Because I know you love writing implements. I mean, I love fountain pens myself, but I know you carry around a really lovely Edwardian or Victorian era pencil, mechanical pencil. So I've got a sneaking suspicion that pencils are right in your wheelhouse.
It's one of those things you don't, at least I never realize, when people talk to me about collecting and my own collecting interests and things like that. I guess as it turns out, I really am enthusiastic about these things and build up collections. But yes, pencils. I do have a lovely little old vest pocket Victorian pencil that expands, into writing length. And that was a product of the Samson Mordaunt Company, which was a predecessor of the company today known as Yardoled. And they make wonderful things in the United Kingdom. In fact, they make fountain pens, which King Charles III would be happier using than his leaky fountain pen that he had all that trouble with. But I'm a great fan of, as you say, writing implements, but also great books. And there was a wonderful scholar and engineer recently passed away, Henry Petrosky, who wrote a book in 1989 called The Pencil, A History of Design and Circumstance. And that is highly recommended. And I can't resist, since I have no willpower, refraining from just pointing out a couple of things that Petrosky mentions in his book. First of all, he says what's come to be known as the pencil was named that because it resembled the brush known in Latin as a penicillum. Penicillum. Penicillum.
I took some of that last week when I was feeling
hallelujah.
down. Yeah.
A fine pointed instrument formed by inserting a carefully shaped tuft of animal hairs into a hollow reed, much as a piece of lead is inserted into a mechanical pencil today, and in turn got its name as a diminutive form of the more general Latin term for brush, peniculus, itself a diminutive form of the word penis, which is Latin for tail. This word was used for the very first fine brushes because they were actually formed from the tails of animals. Well, Petrosky goes on and points out that even when Edison was attempting to create his light bulb, they tried such a variety of material, including graphite from lead pencils. But Edison, as it turns out, was very fond of pencils. He liked short pencils, and he persuaded a pencil factory to turn out short pencils especially for him. And once
was he the progenitor of the or I guess precursor of the pencil you get at golf clubs?
Almost. Edison's pencils, which he ordered in lots of 1,000 and always carried in his lower vest pocket, had a very soft lead, were thicker than average, and were only about 3 inches long. And once, when his order was not filled to his liking, Edison wrote to the Eagle Pencil Company that the last batch was too short. They twist. They stick in the pocket lining, he wrote. So you have to watch out for that.
I guess so.
And then last, Thoreau. One of the issues about Thoreau, of course, is that when he went off to Walden, he made a list of all the things he was taking with him and did not include in his list the pencil with which he was writing the list. But his father was a pencil maker, and you can trace back Thoreau's involvement with pencil engineering. And engineering is a big part of a pencil. Getting what passes for graphite into that cedar wooden shell. It turned out to be a big engineering issue over the decades. And it turns out that Henry's father, John Thoreau, learned the rudiments of pencil making from a self-taught engineer named Joseph Dixon. And Dixon may have learned of Conti's use of clay in pencil leads from a chemist friend named Francis Peabody. And that was another issue, the whole issue of using clay, mixing it appropriately with graphite, be able to manufacture a pencil. Anyway, the simple summary of the pencil is, from an engineering standpoint, it was a big deal.
It sure was. And I have some information from none other than the British Museum talking about Victorian pencils. They note that the modern pencil was invented in 1795 by Nicolas Jacques-Conti, a scientist who was serving in the army of Napoleon. And as you say, his original formulation was a mixture of water, clay, and graphite in a kiln at 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, that's a little clunky. But graphite itself was first discovered in Europe in Bavaria at the start of the 15th century, although the Aztecs had used it as a marker several hundred years earlier. And the purest deposits of lump graphite were found in Borrowdale near Keswick in the Lake District in 1564. And that actually spawned a smuggling industry in the area and a whole black economy. And speaking of black economy, it was appreciated, graphite, that is, was appreciated for leaving a darker mark than lead. But it was so soft and brittle that it needed a holder. And originally, graphite sticks were wrapped in string, and later the graphite was inserted into the hollowed-out wooden sticks. Thus, the wood-case pencil was born. And the first factory opened in 1832 under the name of Banks, Son and Company, now the Derwent Cumberland Pencil Company. Cumberland pencils were those of the highest quality because the graphite left no dust and marked the paper clearly. And
yes, England has this great history in pencil manufacturing just because of those deposits of graphite. And the Derwent Company is a great museum. And in Keswick, you can still go to the Derwent Pencil Museum, where I took my kids when we were on a trip to England. And they were initially quite skeptical, but even they had fun at the Pencil Museum.
Yeah. Well, if you'd like to take a look at the oldest known pencil in the world, which is, of course, part of the holdings of the British Library, it was it was found in a timbered house built in 1630. So no mention as to how old the pencil is. But if you'd like to see that, we've got a link to it in the show notes.
Boy, that would be great to find on eBay right after you found Shakespeare's ballpoint, wouldn't it?
Oh, boy. Well, speaking of Shakespeare, let's get back to literature. Let's get to the canon here and see where we come across pencils in the stories. I guess the first place is in the very first story. Watson is living with Sherlock Holmes in Baker Street and was, getting to know him, spending some time around him. And, of course, he made up that famous list, Sherlock Holmes, his strengths. And he says, I even took a pencil and jotted them down. Now, it's curious that Watson, in the comfort of Baker Street, did not make up a list with pen at that point. He tells us, I think, later on that he crumpled the list up and threw it into the fire, if I'm not mistaken. So it was clearly just kind of literally a back-of-the-envelope calculation where he's just sitting in his chair, grabs a scrap of paper, pulls out a pencil, and makes some observations. This clearly, at this point, it wasn't being committed to book or story form.
Well, you're right about A Study in Scarlet, and in that whole scene, Holmes unfolds the paper. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about Sign of Four. But
that works too.
Yeah, it does work too. But it's a lovely thing in Study in Scarlet when you've got this end there after we've had the whole story about the events of Study in Scarlet, and the evildoer has been caught. Watson tells us
Jefferson Hope.
Jefferson Hope. Yeah. They've heard his account, and they're silent afterwards. When Lestrade finished, we sat for some minutes in a stillness which was only broken by the scratching of Lestrade's pencil as he gave the finishing touches to his shorthand account.
Now, that's interesting. That right there, I don't think I've really concentrated on before. Lestrade's shorthand account. Do we think that that is merely, the inspector noting only the essentials of the narrative, or did he literally know how to write in shorthand?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, I would tend to think that it's notes and that Lestrade didn't. I don't know that the system of shorthand, well, of course it does go back to around, I don't know, the whole system of shorthand and dictation, I don't know, was perfected much before the early 20th century, but I'm probably wrong about that.
Well, there were versions of it in antiquity and imperial China, throughout Europe from the 16th century and on. So,
yeah, but I don't know. If you were a Scotland Yard inspector, I don't know if it was possible or encouraged to take a course in, that sort. I mean, I would think that the way the system operated is you'd bring in people
sure.
to have their statements taken.
Yeah. But anyway, that again, that's Lestrade on the go. He's there in Baker Street, so he had a pencil with him. Very common.
Yeah. Well, and then we get to Sign of Four, and the interesting thing about Sign of Four is, there's a scene there where Holmes is unfolding the map and looking at the odd handiwork that Mary Morstan has brought to his attention. And he describes the paper. It's been pinned to a board at one point, and there's a diagram. And he says at one point there's a small cross. And then he says above it is 3.37 from left in faded pencil writing. And that's very interesting because it talks to your earlier point about Conti and Clay, because the idea of faded pencil writing and the fact that the mixture of the graphite, would not have been perfected by the middle of the 19th century in India and might fade. The idea that the markings would be fading in pencil is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's definitely feeds into the regionality and the timeline. So, because I was wondering about, does pencil really fade? The same way that, say, fountain pen ink might, and that kind of manufacturer certainly would lend itself to fading. Here's an interesting one to me. In The Noble Bachelor, Lestrade has this piece of paper. It was the paper that was passed to Lady St. Simon. And Holmes is looking at it, and Lestrade says, why, you're looking at the wrong side. Holmes says, on the contrary, this is the right side. The right side? You're mad. Here's the note written in pencil over here. And over here, Holmes says, is what appears to be the fragment of a hotel bill, which interests me deeply. So there's a couple of things here about the note that I think are worth noting. One is that the reason Holmes is focused on the hotel bill is because he can tell what kind of a hotel it is and make conclusions about the type of person who stayed there. Okay, and that would of course been done in ink. The other side, which was the note that was scratched to Hattie, Lady St. Simon, was written in pencil, which again indicates that given that it was a hotel bill and given that it was written in pencil, it was likely that this was written on the go by someone in a church pew, for example, someone who was not sitting down and writing a deliberate pre-planned note, but was responding to developments right in front of him. So I think those two things in conjunction make for a more conclusive information with respect to Holmes and his investigation.
Yes, I like that very much. But I also like the touch there that Holmes is looking at the wrong side of the document. And that's just such a, according to Lestrade,
Right.
you know, that it completely escaped him, you know, that Lestrade, that there was something on the other side. That's such a typical Holmesian thing to do.
Yeah. Stick with us. We'll be back after this brief word from our sponsor. The Baker Street Journal has undergone minor changes from time to time, but the good news is it still looks and feels the same as it has over the last decade, even though it has a new editor. Dan Andriacco brings the sensibilities of a journalist, editor, and lifelong Sherlockian to the BSJ as he takes over for Steve Rothman, who spent 23 years in the editor's seat. In his outgoing editorial, Steve reminds us about the attraction and staying power of the Baker Street Journal. When I started reading submissions for the Journal in the autumn of 1999, I was impressed by their quantity and quality. 23 years on, that judgment hasn't changed. I am regularly amazed by Journal's writers' ingenuity. They are curious, imaginative, and widely read. And he's absolutely right. Get yourself on a list of subscribers so you too can be impressed with what Baker Street Journal writers have to say on a quarterly basis. Simply go to bakerstreetirregulars.com and sign up today. Well, what do you make of in Silver Blaze as they're going through the things that were found in Straker's pockets? A box of Vestas, 2 inches of tallow candle, briar pipe, a pouch of sealskin with a half ounce of tobacco, silver watch with a gold chain, 5 sovereigns in gold, and an aluminum pencil case, along with an ivory-handled knife and a delicate, inflexible blade marked with Vice & Co. What would an aluminum pencil case have been akin to like a cigarette case, do you think?
Well, aluminum is one of these things that only was perfected in the middle of the 19th century, and so it was still a very rare thing. And in fact, that sort of lasted up until the idea that aluminum was sort of a rare thing lasted, I think, through the 1930s, because there were still watch bands, men's watch bands made of chased and worked aluminum links and things like that. Mm-hmm. But aluminum was first produced around 1854, I think, for a variety of European scientists and engineers. But the idea here is it's very lightweight. That's a great thing about aluminum.
Yeah.
It's relatively durable. It's easy sort of to work and design. And it's where you put things that are precious and delicate. And you wouldn't want your pencil points or your wooden pencils, to be crushed or cracked. And it's actually, a nice little object in the whole history of these sort of nice little objects that Victorians would carry around with them.
Well, let's fast forward a little bit, because there's a number of instances where pencils play a role, including Holmes kind of dismissing the note he received from Violet Smith and the Copper Beeches. He says, "My own little practice seems to be degenerating into an agency for recovering lost lead pencils."
Yes. Well, that's Violet Hunter, not Violet Smith.
Violet Hunter, yes. Violet Smith is solitary cyclist. But one that is intriguing to me, and this actually played a part in one of the Basil Rathbone films. In The Missing Three-Quarter, Holmes took the forms, the telegraph forms at the telegraph office, where Godfrey Staunton sent a telegram, and he carried them to the window and looked at the uppermost telegram form. He said, "It's a pity he did not write in pencil," said he, throwing them down again with a shrug of disappointment. As you no doubt frequently have Observed, Watson, the impression usually goes through, a fact which has dissolved many a happy marriage. However, I can find no trace here. And of course, what he means is when you're pressing hard on a stack of paper, not only will the pencil transfer to the piece that you're writing on, but it will usually leave an impression underneath. And if you remember in that Rathbone film, he took a pencil, turned it on its side, and began shading over that piece of paper that was left to basically get an outline of what had been written. I don't know if you've ever tried that trick before, Bert.
Oh, sure. Well, when I was a kid, we would play around with codes and secret messages. And that was one method, excuse me, of making an impression in paper that wouldn't be visible, with the naked eye unless you really smeared some pencil lead around the surface. And that's a great scene in that particular picture, which is Holmes in this Sherlock Holmes and the Secret Weapon. And he's trying to find this missing German scientist who was in a woman's apartment and made some notes about where he was going or writing, and that's the pad that Holmes picks up. And of course, that's the same episode where it turns out that you can find a clue by turning. Basically, Moriarty winds up moistening a piece of paper and then turning it over to read it from a different angle.
I got to remember that. But this is an interesting one. The retired colorman, he asks Watson to put himself in the mindset of someone who was shut in a room, less than 2 minutes to live, but you wanted to take revenge on the fiend who was mocking you from the other side of the door. What would you do? Watson says, well, write a message. Exactly. You tell people how you died. No use writing on paper, that will be seen. If you wrote on the wall, someone might rest upon it. Now, look here. Just above the skirting is scribbled with a purple indelible pencil. We, that is all. And he deduces that he was trying to write, we were murdered. Which is different than, if you remember the Holy Grail. Go to the castle. Well, what is that? I said, well, maybe he died when he was writing it. So if he was dying, he wouldn't bother to write, he'd just die. Well, maybe he was dictating it. No, but he said he was writing, we were murdered. If you find an indelible pencil on the body, that would lead to the conclusion there. But when Holmes refers to an indelible pencil, are we talking like a grease pencil, or what do you think that is?
It's a pencil with some dye mixed in with the lead, some sort of lasting coloring. In this case, purple, obviously. But in the manufacture of the lead or the graphite, the lead isn't really lead, but right. The what we were talking about earlier, let's say it's a clay, a sort of a ceramic, a soft ceramic. You're mixing in some dye that will last longer than simply the particles being rubbed into the paper. It'll stain.
Probably the precursor to the ballpoint pen. Being more transportable than certainly a fountain pen.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other.
Yeah,
that's a whole other question where I could bore you happily with the history of the ballpoint.
Yeah, and I'm not going to let you. So let's finish up with the pencil that was really a centerpiece in one of the stories. Can you guess which story that is? Oh,
unfortunately, yes. It's not. It hasn't really stood up to scrutiny, the whole thing. But it's The Three Students, where a pencil and its shavings are a big deal. And of course, the improbability is that, forgetting it, well, I wonder if it's the greatest case with the maximum number of improbabilities. But the gist is, here you are, you're sneaking into someplace, and you've seen some information, And for some reason, seeing it isn't enough. You feel that you need to write it down and copy it. But you broke your pencil.
Yeah.
What do you do?
And, quite frankly, if I am putting myself in the situation of Gilchrist here, seeing, the answer key, essentially, or at least the topic that you are going to be required to translate, I would have simply copied the first few words or the first sentence and the last sentence. So you've basically bracketed your text. And you're not going to sit there and write out all 3 pages of Thucydides in the original Greek while you're waiting. But that aside, so Holmes finds these pencil shavings, and one of them included the letters NN. And Holmes says it's at the end of the word. You're aware that Johann Faber is the most common maker's name. Now, it's not clear to me that there's much of a pencil that follows Johann. So, I'm trying to think about how this would work. The yo is still left.
Yo!
Or the yoha is still left on the pencil. And the Faber is gone. So it has to happen. It has to be in a certain direction. So I'm used to seeing the writing on the pencil going the opposite direction of what Holmes is describing.
Well, me too. And it's one of those things that no one probably pays much attention to, but you could try it yourself. I do think that the majority of time, if you pick up a pencil, let's say you're holding a pencil in your left hand with the eraser on the left and the point on the right, you would be reading the words on the wooden shaft of the pencil from left to right. And so that would mean Johann Faber, Johann Faber. And indeed, the Faber would be long gone, but there would be the NN from Johann, and now your pencil is broken, and now you've got to sharpen it, and you sharpen away the NN, and all you're left with is the yo.
Yo. Whose pencil is this? And it was of an unusual size. Holmes and Watson skirted about town and visited 4 stationers to match the pencil chips with, and none of them had it in stock. And so Holmes and Watson went door to door and tried to narrow it down.
Yeah, well, he says there, the piece remaining is only about 1.5 inches long.
Yeah, that's shorter than Edison's pencils.
Yeah, it's half the size of poor old Thomas Edison's pencils.
So, never came across that pencil, but he was able to borrow a knife and sharpen his own. No smoking pencil in this particular story. Well, all fascinating examples, and there's other trifling mentions of pencils in the stories. The Greek Interpreter, the Naval Treaty, Dancing Men, the Hound of the Baskervilles, Man with a Twisted Lip, but Red Circle as well. But, we wanted to make sure that we got to the point. And I'm going to go back and see if I can erase some of these comments.
Well, if you do, it will only be a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes. As a matter of practice, it seems to be degenerating into an agency for recovering lost lead pencils and giving advice to young ladies from boarding schools.
My dear, dear friend, how can you say such a thing?
I think I have touched bottom.